For years, a silent dread simmered in the hearts of Nigeria's youth. It was a fear that came with a specific name: SARS, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. This police unit, created to fight violent crime, had instead become a symbol of terror for the very people it was meant to protect. Young Nigerians learned to live with the constant threat of extortion, harassment, and brutality. They were profiled for their hairstyles, their laptops, their phones, for simply looking young and hopeful in a country that often felt determined to crush their spirit. This was not an occasional injustice. It was a daily reality, a grinding erosion of dignity that left a generation feeling like prey in their own homeland. The anger was not born overnight. It was the accumulation of countless stories whispered in fear and shared in hushed tones. It was the pain of families who lost sons and daughters to extrajudicial killings, their grief compounded by the suffocating silence of official indifference. Justice was an abstract concept, a luxury they could not afford. The system that was supposed to offer recourse was the very source of their pain. This deep-seated frustration created a powerful, unspoken bond among millions of young people. They were a generation connected not just by technology and aspirations, but by a shared trauma and a burning desire for something better, something just. Then, in the first days of October 2020, the dam of silence broke. A video, raw and horrifying, circulated online, allegedly showing SARS officers killing a young man. It was a scene Nigerians knew all too well, but this time, seeing it captured so starkly was different. The video was not just evidence, it was a catalyst. It gave a face and a finality to the years of whispered horrors. The simmering dread boiled over into a national outcry, a collective roar that could no longer be ignored. The youth of Nigeria, armed with their phones and their pain, found a single powerful voice in a simple, desperate plea. That plea became a hashtag, a movement, and a promise: EndSARS. It was more than a demand to disband a rogue police unit. It was a cry for fundamental human rights. It was a declaration that the lives of young Nigerians mattered. The hashtag became a rallying point, a digital bonfire around which a generation gathered to share their stories, their anger, and their hope. From a single video, a movement was ignited, spreading with the speed of a wildfire across social media and setting the stage for an unprecedented confrontation with the powers that had for so long ignored their suffering. The movement that began online did not stay there. It spilled onto the streets of Lagos, Abuja, and cities across the nation, transforming digital outrage into a physical presence. The protests were a remarkable display of peaceful defiance and meticulous organization. Young Nigerians, often dismissed as disengaged, proved to be master strategists. They used social media not just to mobilize, but to create a support infrastructure that the state itself often failed to provide. They organized legal aid for arrested protesters, set up emergency hotlines, and even dispatched private security to protect demonstrators from thugs. It was a government in miniature, built on trust and solidarity. The spirit of the protests was one of incredible unity and generosity. At protest sites, strangers became family. Food and water were freely distributed, medical teams tended to the injured, and volunteers worked tirelessly to clean up the streets at the end of each day. This was not a riot, it was a community. Funds were raised through crowdfunding, managed with transparent accountability by groups like the Feminist Coalition, showcasing a level of integrity that stood in stark contrast to the corruption they were protesting. Acts of kindness were everywhere, a testament to the protesters' deep belief in the Nigeria they were fighting to build. This was a movement defined by its creativity and its courage. Protesters held sit-ins, blocking major roads with nothing but their bodies and their conviction. They waved the Nigerian flag, sang the national anthem, and held candlelight vigils for the victims of police brutality. Their demonstrations were vibrant expressions of a generation's soul, filled with art, music, and impassioned speeches. They were keenly aware of the risks they were taking, yet they came out day after day. Their courage was infectious, drawing global attention and support from the Nigerian diaspora and international figures, amplifying their voices on a world stage. The world watched as a generation found its power. The #EndSARS movement became a global phenomenon, a powerful lesson in modern activism. It showed how a decentralized, leaderless movement could sustain itself through shared purpose and digital tools. For a brief, hopeful period, It felt as if change was not just possible, but inevitable. The protesters were not just demanding an end to police brutality, they were demanding a seat at the table of their own future. They were rewriting the narrative of their country, one peaceful protest, one shared meal, and one defiant tweet at a time. The hope that had illuminated the streets of Nigeria was brutally extinguished on the night of October 20th, 2020. At the Lekki Toll Gate in Lagos, a major hub of the peaceful protests, thousands of young people had gathered as they had for days. They sat on the ground, waving Nigerian flags and singing the national anthem. They were unarmed, their only weapons the songs on their lips and the hope in their hearts. As darkness fell, the lights at the toll gate were switched off, and the peaceful demonstration descended into a scene of unimaginable horror. In the ensuing chaos, a deep sense of betrayal began to settle in. According to eyewitness accounts and reports from human rights organizations like Amnesty International, uniformed men, identified as soldiers of the Nigerian army, arrived and opened fire on the crowd. The air, once filled with the sounds of protest anthems, was suddenly pierced by the sound of live ammunition. Panic erupted. Protesters scrambled for cover, their flags falling to a ground stained with blood. In the terrifying confusion, people tried to help the wounded, their calls for aid lost in the darkness and the gunfire. The live streams that had broadcast the protests' peaceful energy now captured a nation's heartbreak in real time. The immediate aftermath was a deafening silence from the authorities. For days, the government denied the massacre, shifting its story and downplaying the events of that night. This official silence was a second assault, a denial of the victims' existence and the protesters' pain. It felt like a profound betrayal. The very government that was sworn to protect its citizens was now accused of turning its guns on them and refusing to even acknowledge the bloodshed. For the youth who had dared to dream of a better Nigeria, the silence was as violent as the bullets. It was the cold, hard confirmation that their lives did not matter to those in power. The Lekki Toll Gate shooting became a wound on the nation's soul. It marked the tragic end of the street protests, but fueled an even deeper resolve. The grief was immense, a collective sorrow for the lives lost and the hope that was shattered. The event left an indelible scar on the psyche of a generation, a traumatic memory of a night when the state met a peaceful cry for justice with lethal force. The question of who gave the order remains unanswered, a haunting symbol of the lack of accountability that the protesters had been fighting against from the very beginning. In the wake of the tragedy, the government's response was widely seen as a failure of leadership and a deep betrayal. While officials offered condolences and promised investigations, their actions spoke louder than their words. The initial promise to disband SARS was followed by the creation of a new unit, SWAT, which many feared was simply a rebranding of the same systemic problem. The judicial panels of inquiry set up to investigate abuses were a step in the right direction, but their process was slow, and their recommendations have largely been ignored. Justice for the victims of Lekki and countless others remains elusive, a distant hope rather than a tangible reality. What should have been done differently is painfully clear. The government should have engaged in genuine, open dialogue with the youth from the outset, treating their concerns with the seriousness they deserved. Instead of deploying force, they should have demonstrated a commitment to real structural police reform, not just changing names, but changing mindsets, training, and accountability. There needed to be swift and transparent prosecution of officers guilty of brutality. Most importantly, the government needed to see the protests not as a threat to be crushed, but as a vital call for a more just and inclusive nation where young people are seen as partners in governance. The lessons from #EndSARS resonate far beyond Nigeria's borders. Ending police brutality everywhere requires a multifaceted approach. It starts with comprehensive training for law enforcement that emphasizes de-escalation, human rights, and community policing. It demands independent oversight bodies with the power to investigate and discipline misconduct, ensuring that no officer is above the law. It requires investing in communities to address the root causes of crime, such as poverty and lack of opportunity. Ultimately, it requires a justice system that is transparent, fair, and accessible to all, restoring public trust in the institutions meant to protect them. Though the streets fell silent, the spirit of #EndSARS lives on. It awakened a generation to its political power and proved that the youth are a force that can no longer be ignored. The fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint, and the seeds planted in October 2020 continue to grow. There is still hope, a resilient hope that resides in the hearts of young people who refuse to give up on their country. The world's leaders must learn to listen to the voices of their youth, for in their cries for justice lies the blueprint for a better, more peaceful future for everyone.